Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fascinating stack of insights here, sent in by you, our listener. It's all about, well, trying to make sense of the world of consumer tech, specifically computers. You know, the real cost, how long they actually last, and why getting a new one or even just upgrading can feel impossible sometimes, like hitting a wall.
That's right. Today, we're going to try and cut through some of that confusion. Forget just like the stock market view. We're
Yep.
diving into what this information suggests about product design, the pricing, and yeah, why your shiny new device might feel old way too fast. It's really about understanding the system behind the tech we use every single day.
Okay, let's get into it then. We hear a lot about tech inflation, but usually that's all about company stocks, right? What really stood out from the info provided was the focus on the price of the computers themselves, especially the cheaper ones.
Exactly. What this deep dive seems to reveal is a pattern, suggesting computer makers are kind of following the phone industry's playbook. It looks like a shift away from letting users upgrade parts. The focus now, it seems to be more on replacing the whole thing. Need more power. Buy a new machine, not just a better component.
Yeah, you can see how that started with laptops, can't you? They're all sealed up, makes it super tricky to swap things out. Maybe RAM, maybe a battery if you're lucky and, allowed to.
True. But the interesting part here is how this applies to desktop computers, the ones that were supposed to be modular. But even there, this investigation uncovers some, well, concerning trends. We looked at the usual parts: motherboard, power supply, CPU, RAM, graphics, storage, the basics.
And there's this specific example configuration that pops up, often sold as a budget option. It paints a pretty stark picture. We're talking maybe 4 gigabytes of RAM, perhaps 256 gigs of storage, could be a slow old hard drive or a tiny SSD and a processor running at like 2 gigahertz. And apparently these things are selling for what, $200, $300?
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting based on what we've found, and maybe a little ironic. The information highlights that most modern operating systems, just on their own, need about 4 gigs of RAM, just to boot up and do basically nothing else.
Wait, hang on. So the minimum the OS needs is the total amount of RAM the computer ships with. That leaves zero room for doing anything.
Precisely. It suggests you're hitting a performance wall the second you turn it on. What we're seeing suggests a situation where these computers might ship with an OS that's just fundamentally mismatched with the hardware inside if you actually want to, use it.
Wow. Okay, that actually leads perfectly into the next big thing we pulled out, how the system seems maybe deliberately set up to stop you upgrading. It feels less like progress and more like a replacement treadmill you're forced onto.
That's a really key takeaway here, I think. It makes you question the whole design philosophy. We found things pointing to, well, deliberate incompatibilities, like new CPUs being designed with different sockets, physically different, so they won't fit into older motherboards. Want a faster chip? Boom, you need a new motherboard too.
So what used to be a fairly simple CPU swap to get more speed now means basically rebuilding the core of your machine.
Exactly. And it gets tighter. We're seeing motherboards with really low hard limits on RAM, sometimes capped at just 4 gigs, maybe 8 gigs max, no matter what stick you try to put in. Just blocks that easy upgrade path completely.
It's like they're building these little digital walls everywhere, and it probably doesn't stop there, does it? Say you manage to get a decent setup, and then 6 months later, a killer new graphics card comes out. You buy it.
And you might not even realize right away how much power it needs. Our findings suggest these new powerful cards often draw way more wattage. So suddenly, you might also need a bigger power supply unit. That's another cost, another hassle you didn't expect just from wanting better graphics.
So one upgrade triggers another, and pretty soon you've spent almost as much as a new computer anyway.
It really shines a light on those hidden costs, doesn't it? And then there's another big barrier we uncovered: software, OS updates.
Ah, yes. The OS update wall. Like you can't get the latest Windows or Mac OS because your system lacks some specific chip, a TPM thing.
That's the one. Trusted Platform Module. The information explains that newer operating systems often require it. And if you can't update your OS, well, the ripple effect is huge. All your other software apps, games, whatever, they might stop getting updates too because they depend on the latest OS features or, security patches.
So you're not just stuck with an old OS, you're stuck with potentially outdated versions of everything else too. That's kind of scary.
And for gamers, specifically, the information really hammers home how new games often demand the very latest graphics cards. It can make a card that felt high-end just a year ago suddenly feel sluggish, cause performance problems, another nudge towards buying new hardware.
It really does paint this picture where the hardware, the power needs, the software updates, It all seems to conspire to make upgrading components super hard, maybe impossible. It just pushes you towards replacing the whole box.
And apparently this isn't just about the really cheap machines. What we found suggests that even if you try to be smart, buy a mid-range PC planning to upgrade later, you still hit roadblocks, often subtle ones.
Okay, tell me about the subtle ones. How else do they block you?
Well, our dive uncovers some pretty clever stuff. Like say you want to swap your SSD for a much faster one, maybe one that runs at 6 gigabits per second. You might find out you don't just need the drive itself. Depending on your motherboard, you might need special SATA 3 cables, maybe even an external PCIe USB card.
An external card? For an internal drive connection? That sounds incredibly backward and frustrating.
It does. And the information suggests it's a real issue. What's worse, if you don't get those extra bits and just plug the faster SSD in, you might not even realize you're not getting the speed you paid for, not unless you run specific tests. So loads of people could be running these fast drives way below their potential speed and have no idea.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about does it fit, it's about does it actually work as advertised.
Yeah.
Any other physical limits mentioned?
Yeah, there were examples about the physical size of things, especially in smaller computers. These micro motherboards you find in compact desktops. Often they only have one PCIe slot. So what do? Use it for your graphics card, which you probably need. Or for a super fast PCIe SSD if you need storage speed. You might not have room for both.
So you literally might not have the physical space, even if the parts are technically compatible.
Exactly. And even if you get one of those little PCIe SSD sticks that slot right onto the board, some small cases are apparently so tight that the stick itself, maybe with its heatsink, physically stops the case cover from closing properly. It's not just the slot, it's the actual, 3D space.
Man, it sounds like a total minefield, even if you try to plan your upgrades. What about systems that are actually powerful? Do the problems stop there?
Not quite. We found observations suggesting that even on big, powerful machines, the standard cooling sands they ship with are often, not up to the job, especially when high-performance parts are running hard. This can cause throttling the parts slow down to avoid overheating, which means you might need to buy faster aftermarket fans or even pricey liquid cooling just to get the speed you thought you already paid for.
Another unexpected cost just to make the thing run right.
Absolutely. And the speed of component incompatibility is also really stressed. The info gives examples like DDR3 RAM from 2014 or DDR4 from just 2024 apparently being incompatible with DDR5 standards coming out in 2025. This super fast cycle means even fairly new parts can become useless quickly, forcing a whole system buy if you want the latest memory.
That really hammers home that built-in obsolescence idea we talked about. And speaking of obsolete, what we read suggests the resale value of these computers is pretty terrible.
The information we reviewed is quite blunt about it. It says the resale value drops faster than a piece of paper in freefall.
Ouch. Yeah, definitely not holding its value like some other things.
Not even close. According to this deep dive, a single keynote announcement from a big tech company can instantly wipe a chunk of value off your current machine. These aren't seen as collectibles. They quickly become, junk in terms of market value and usefulness. Eventually, they just get tossed.
I guess some people try to reuse them, right? Like maybe turn an old PC into a home server or something.
That attempt is mentioned, yeah. But the information notes there are often big compatibility problems. Plus, the trend is towards needing online access for everything anyway, for security and just ease of use. And it also points out that lots of older CPUs, especially gaming ones, just aren't compatible with the latest operating systems. So even using them for simple tasks becomes difficult.
So even giving them a second job is hard because of the same compatibility walls. Okay, so that brings up a huge question then. If they lose value so fast and are hard to upgrade, who's buying all these computers?
This was one of the most surprising findings, actually. The main buyers identified. Large institutions, first up.
Government.
Federal, state, city level, apparently buying what are described as slow and underperforming machines for their agencies.
Yeah, government's buying the low-end stuff. That feels backwards.
That's what this information indicates, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of surprising, right? Second on the list, schools. Both private and public schools are described as loyal customers for junk, underperforming, or mediocre computers.
Schools, too. Wow. So a huge chunk of the market for these, let's say, less than stellar machines is actually big institutional buyers.
That's the picture that emerges, yeah. The third group mentioned is the private sector. Businesses, they apparently try to get better deals, but often end up with mid-tier stuff.
Okay, so how do the computer companies justify selling these potentially underpowered machines to such big buyers? What's the sales pitch?
Well, the argument they reportedly use is that most applications run on big central servers anyway, so the local machine doesn't need to be that powerful. It's more like a terminal. However, the information we looked at strongly counters that. It highlights the reality that these machines often struggle just to run the OS smoothly. So the idea of them handling even terminal duties for complex software seems, well, optimistic in practice.
That sounds like a major gap between the sales talk and the actual day-to-day experience described.
It really does.
Yeah.
The information even gives specific examples, mentioning government agencies making a significant mistake trying to run full virtual machines on these low-end boxes, leading to, frequent crashes, lost work, really bad for productivity. And there's a note suggesting the GSA, the General Services Administration, isn't really doing anything about this issue in government purchasing.
So these big buyers are key to keeping this market going. But our deep dive also pointed to another group influencing things, maybe more at the high end, young people.
Yes, exactly. Young people are identified as a really important demographic, often willing to pay top dollar for the absolute newest releases, especially when tied to the latest games. The suggestion is that this rush to buy right at launch, maybe without thinking too much about long-term value or upgrades, helps keep those initial prices high. It's speculated that prices might actually drop more if people just waited a bit longer before buying.
That makes a lot of sense. If companies can sell a ton of units right away at a premium, there's less pressure to, build them to last or make upgrades easy. That would just slow down the replacement cycle.
Precisely. The overall feeling we got from digging into this is that computer prices seem to keep climbing, but without huge leaps in real innovation or improvements in lifespan or upgrade options. The focus feels heavily tilted towards strategies that boost company stock by encouraging frequent replacements rather than delivering, lasting value or power to the person actually using the computer.
Okay, so let's zoom back out. This deep dive, based on everything you sent in, has really exposed a system that feels geared towards planned obsolescence. We've seen how even cheap machines might be underpowered from the get-go, the sort of deliberate roadblocks making upgrades tough, the hidden costs piling up, the incredibly fast way they lose value, and this really interesting role of big institutional buyers and maybe younger consumers keeping the whole cycle going.
And understanding all that, that's why this matters to you. It gives you the knowledge to navigate the tech world a bit better, right?
Yeah.
Manage your expectations about how long things will last, what they really cost over time, to see past the marketing hype to the business model underneath,
Yeah.
which seems much more focused on replacement than on making things last or letting you easily improve what you already own.
It definitely changes how you look at it. It's not just about comparing specs anymore, is it? It's about the whole ecosystem you're buying into.
It creates this really interesting tension, doesn't it? You have the public image of constant, amazing tech progress, and then the reality presented here, which suggests product design is maybe more about pushing frequent replacement than about user-friendly upgrades or genuine long-term use.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a final kind of provocative thought for you to mull over based directly on these findings. Given how important these large institutional buyers' governments, schools seem to be in buying up these lower-end, quickly outdated machines, how might their buying habits, or maybe their lack of stricter standards, actually influence the way tech companies design and price computers for all of us? Something to think about.